Hi everybody, this is Louise Ander speaking from Lilongwe. I'm very pleased that you all stayed in the waiting room virtually to join us. And thank you everybody to the people in the room who've stayed in the room waiting for this to start while we just had a few tech problems. But we think we're across those now. We think everything is solved. So without further ado, I'd like to begin by introducing this session. I'd also like to start with apologies from Edward Joy, who's actually traveling at the moment, so he can't join in at the moment. But everybody else that you can see on this information PowerPoint is with us, and or we have a virtual presentation from Ana Moltedo from FAO. So we will be running through this event. One thing I want to pre-warn is that when we come to Ana Moltedo's virtual presentation, those of you online may need to turn your audio up just to be able to hear as clearly as people speaking into this laptop or one of the devices connected live. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing here.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just saying hello before I'm sharing my screen. So I'll turn off the video to save bandwidth. Okay, thank you very much, Louise. Thank you to everyone. I don't see you in the room. I just see there's like some people online. It's a really pleasure to be here anyway. Lovely to be allowed to address you. My name is Ellen Katrine Kjøstrud. I work for Statistics Norway. I'm also chair of the UNCEAG task team on food security and consumption statistics. I'll go directly to it. I'm here to talk about a guideline that we are working on under the aegis of the UN Committee of Experts on Food Security, Agriculture and Rural Statistics, which we're planning to submit to the United Nations Statistics Commission in March next year. And the name of this guideline is Processing Food Consumption Data from Household Consumption and Expenditure Surveys. So this drawing here on the right is an overview of the process that are described in the guidelines. Before I start, I'm not going to explain a lot about these household surveys. I hope that you are a little bit familiar with them, but I want you to take note that the data in those surveys is collected for all consumption, not only food consumption. And historically, they are collected for Consumer Price Index national accounts. It's economic statistics, and it's moved into the poverty analysis, welfare analysis, and then only started used for food consumption and food security. So these guidelines that we are writing are to prepare the data for all these uses. So these four main uses, when I talk about the main uses, it's these four that we had at the back of our minds. Now, the people who have been the secretariat writing this guideline are working with poverty analysis and food security analysis. So we might have some blind spots for the other guys, but we're hoping that now that this guideline is now out on the hearing again with experts, that if there are any blind spots, they will be picked up. One very brief on the questionnaires. So these surveys, the data on food consumption are collected in many different ways, but we have stuck to the ways that are recommended in this red book up in the corner, food data collection in household consumption and expenditure surveys, which is a guideline that was presented and endorsed at the UN Statistics Commission in 2018, at that time by IAEG AG, which is the predecessor of this UNCEAG that I'm part of. Which gives recommendations on what to collect and how to collect it. It doesn't give a questionnaire like you're looking at here. That one comes from that blue book in the bottom corner, which is from the World Bank LSMS. That's one of several ways of collecting it that we are talking about in the guidelines. And it has created a lot of work for us to try to accommodate different ways of collecting the data. But the basics is that there household consumption and expenditure service asks how much a household has consumed or which food items from which sources and what the monetary value of it is. And the really excellent thing about it is from this we can produce statistics to inform the food system. So now I'm going to explain why there's a COMESA logo down in the corner of my presentation. It's because we work together with COMESA on processing data and analyzing data together with NSOs in their member countries. And this news article is from March, and that's because Zimbabwe were the first people to actually publish at the as part of this. The other countries that are part of it now, it's Malawi, Zambia, Uganda, Kenya, and then Tanzania and Rwanda said they're interested, but we haven't started yet. And I think Malawi is up for some publications very soon, but it's Kumesa and another colleague of mine who's working on that. So what is the problem? Because we have a project, so there must be a problem. Statistics Norway is working on capacity building and working with our sister organizations on analyzing and producing statistics. And we picked up some problems over these 14 years that I've been working on this specific statistics. And one of them is that there are at least 2 rounds of processing the data after it's been collected. And the first round is usually for publishing the tables and calculating poverty. Then later on, somebody comes to do food security, and they usually start from the beginning because the poverty analysts who's doing the poverty processing, they don't need all the details that we need when we do food security. And that is a problem. It's a waste of time. It's a lot of extra work, but it also creates inconsistent statistics. You'll end up with maybe a different food share of consumption if you're interested in the monetary values, or you will end up with different kilocalories per food group if that's what you're looking for. So, and it's different results that shouldn't be different. It's just that the process is not finished by either of those analysts. And then it also leads to underutilization of the data because quite often the food security part is not even done or it comes really late. So we wanted more of that. And we discovered this lack of documentation. So if you come in and try to redo something that has been done before to create some consistency with the following survey, it's difficult to find what was done before. And then for us from Statistics Norway's side, the first thing people ask us when we come to work is, what are the international recommendations? But we couldn't find any. And we've been hoping for a while that somebody would, come up with it, that are a bit bigger than us. We're just a small environment of 3 people working on it here at Statistics Norway. But in the end, we decided to ask someone to join us to actually make it. So that's what's coming now. In that document, this is the goal. The primary goal of these guidelines is to assist the data owners in preparing their data for the main users in one process. And in short, it means that the final data set contains the quantity, the dietary energy, and the monetary value for every food item consumed by the household and from every source. Source here is like, did you buy it? Did you grow it yourself? Did somebody give it to you? And that's it. That's where we stop in that guideline. I can come back to the limitations of the guideline at the end. I skipped it because I don't have a lot of time. So I'm going straight into what it contains. There's an introduction. And in the introduction, we make some recommendations. This is what we want the Statistics Commission to kind of agree upon. And it leads back to the problem. We want them to agree upon the joint processing of food consumption data, full processing of the food consumption data, consistency in data processing between surveys, generate survey-specific nutrient conversion tables. And Anna Moltedo, who's going to talk after me, she knows much more than me about that, but it's a very important thing. I can also take questions if you have questions, and that it's documented and that the documentation is available for people outside as metadata and information, and that we share practices, which I assume is one of the things you are doing where you are in this exciting conference. After that, the actual guidelines is, it's a recommendation, but it's also every statistic office or data producer will have to adjust it a little bit for their own purpose because nobody is exactly the same, but it's advice on what to think about when you do it. And if you haven't got a plan already, you can use the manual as a guide. So the rest of the guideline is split into 2 parts. There's a part one with some general issues where we're presenting the data collection tools. We talk about 4 levels of cleaning because it got quite confusing in this 11 steps in part 2 to talk about cleaning every time. So we have got like how to identify outliers in this introduction. The 4 levels of data cleaning is, the first one is domain, obvious, and systematic errors. You can see the green, if you can't read it, the green arrows are the data cleaning. And then the blue one is the 11th step, which is coming in part 2. So domain, obvious, and systematic errors is things like people using illegal values for reporting how they purchase data or how much they consume, like saying that you bought milk in a basket. Then the second level is cleaning data at food item unit level, which means before you transfer it into grams, which has quite a few advantages that is talked about in the guideline. And then there is a third level where you clean outliers in gram or after changing it into gram, and the monetary values are taken here on the way, which basically covers the one you couldn't already clean at unit value level. For instance, things that are too few to be able to identify outliers. And then the last one, which is probably obvious to everyone, cleaning aggregates at per capita, because only when you sum up all the kilocalories that everybody has been consuming, you can see if it's way out of what a human being can consume or not can consume. So that's at the end, but at the end there, it's step 4. We really hope to not find outliers if we did a good job before we got there. Part 2 is an 11-step process. I've got them listed here. But I can show you a picture from my office. This is right behind me. These are all the steps in that process. There's lots and lots of sub-steps in the process, but we have sorted it out as these 11 steps, where the first one describes all the data and auxiliary data you need. We move on to the cleaning, adjusting how to merge data files, cleaning again, impute monetary values, convert the quantities into grams, edit quantities, calculate dietary energy, estimate remaining dietary energy, which is such a confusing process that we made a chapter with by itself, and then aggregating and preparing documentation and share data. And throughout, at the end of each of these sub-steps, we try to give some advice on what to document, which people will need later. So I'll mention a couple of central issues in it. Firstly, we spend time from different units of measurements to grams. This is the quantity. And theoretically, that's a very straightforward thing to do. You have a measurement in one type of unit. You need some kind of a conversion factor, and then you end up with the food in grams. We are suggesting grams. Some people like to work in kilos, but we're suggesting grams. The problem is that you have this non-standard unit of measurement, so you need to know what is a pile, what is a bucket, what is a can in the specific country, in the specific markets. So the issues come when you have or do not have those from a market survey. I'm not going to go into it. We are covering that area in the guidelines. Secondly, estimating monetary value. And from the questionnaires we have, there's 3 different ways that monetary value is likely to be estimated. One is directly from the interview, which basically means you ask, because we're looking for the monetary value of the food consumed, not necessarily the food purchased. So we ask directly from the household, how much, what is the value of that food that you just told me that you consumed? And then we just use that directly. Indirectly from the interview means that you also ask people what they purchased and what they paid for it, and then you calculate a unit value from that, and then you use that to impute the monetary value of the food consumed based on price per gram or similar. And then there's a third one, which is to not get it from the households, but using market prices. So you get the quantity from the household, and then you get the unit value from market prices, and you impute the value of it. And the first 2 are by far the most used. Using market prices is getting, there's a very interesting discussion about it, and there is some very interesting research by the LSMS team of the World Bank in Malawi on using market prices, but we're still, at least for now, in a situation where market surveys that are good enough to be used for this are so rare. So you will, the jury's still out on which one is best, but when it comes to what's available, it's the first two. We talk about all three of them. And then it's dietary, energy, and macronutrients. So emphasis on making a quality nutrient conversion table, discussing with the people who actually know what they're talking about, nutritionists or and other people in that field, to make a good NCT, as we call it. I hope this is familiar language, but an NCT is like you have a food composition table where all the foods are listed with their kilocalories and their macronutrients and micronutrients and all that. And then you have the questions in the questionnaire. And even though a questionnaire might have like 200 different food items, that's very few compared to what you find in the food composition table. So making this matching table between the two is to pick the right items from the food composition table that matches best what people are answering. So if you have like a full page of alternative rice that you can impute on, whereas the survey just asked rice, how much rice did you eat? And then you have to pick the one that is mostly consumed in that country in the right way. We talk a little bit about it in the guideline, and FAO is helping us to make a manual on how to do it separately to the guideline, but they are going to come together. And then there's two ways of calculating it. One is to just calculate it directly from grams. You have the grams, you have the calories per grams, and then you calculate. And then there's several indirect estimations for calculating kilocalories from food eaten away from home, which is often just meals or the amount of money you paid for it, calories from mixed meals, and kilocalories from the so-called other items, which is at the end of a list of food items, you get like other vegetables or other meat. So we talk about that as well. And this is my last slide. I have really lost track of time. So what does the future look like? I started with, we have a problem, so we must be kind of visualizing something better in the future. Well, I like to connect it to the United Nations National Quality Assurance Framework. And they have 8 quality elements that in that publication, and 4 of them, I think, is touched by this guideline. If the guidelines are used by statistics producers who are not doing it already, I mean, there's some people doing a really good job already. But obviously, from there, we get a lot of this experience. But if you're not, then there's room for better quality monetary values, better quality measures of quantity, better quality matching of food composition information as energy and macronutrients. We are not going into macronutrients, but that's a whole different discussion. And more informed future surveys. And that's last one, is that when you dig into this properly inside the NSOs with the people who's producing the data, it's more likely that the improvements carry forward to the next survey. You will realize that, you know, we didn't have the conversion factors we needed. Next survey, somebody will remember to collect more conversion factors, that kind of improvements. That will improve accuracy of the statistics. Then improvement coherence with less inconsistencies between analysis from the same data, as I already talked about, and less inconsistencies between surveys so that time series are more trustworthy. Transparency and clarity is one of those quality elements. And if I switch the two, better documentation will lead to improved transparency and understanding if it's open and published, which we recommend. And then comparability, we didn't really expect this to lead to more harmonized methods between countries, but we realized that working with it and discussing it with several countries at the same time is leading towards countries picking up ideas from each other, and hopefully it will lead to harmonized methods also in processing. Because when it comes to harmonizing surveys, the way you produce your questionnaire is much more important, obviously. But yeah, we're quite ambitious, and any improvement is an improvement. So hopefully some of these will be seen in the countries who pick up the guideline, or at least we as trainers can say there is a guideline and there is a internationally agreed standard. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Right, so we're going to move from the brilliant initiative that I think many of us will be really excited about that Ellen has been describing, because it's really going to help with the quality assurance undertaken on the data for nutritional purposes. And now we're going to move to a virtual presentation, a pre-recorded presentation, which is from Ana Moltedo. Just to say, for those of you not online earlier, those of you online may need to turn up your audio to hear this. It is audible, but you may need to turn up your speakers to hear this one. So I'm about to press play and I will mute myself. So please, if there are problems, put questions in the chat.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Ana Moltedo and I am a consultant working for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations.
Now it works.
We talk about narrowing data gaps using household level data. Last September, there was a meeting to launch a report on data collection and analysis tools for food security and nutrition. In that meeting, it was mentioned that data gaps still exist. Furthermore, even if data are available, often policymakers are not aware of their existence and their relevance, or they do not use the data properly. To narrow in data gaps, 5 teams from 3 FAO divisions have been working together to create a food and diet domain. This domain will be launched in the coming months at FAOSTAT, which is the FAO Corporate Statistical Database. The food and diet domain will publish statistics on food and nutrient consumption from data at the individual level, statistics on food and nutrient apparent consumption from data at the household level, and statistics on food and nutrient availability from data at the national level. The sources of the individual level data are, on one hand, surveys that include questions needed to compute the minimum dietary diversity for women indicator, and on the other hand, surveys that are uploaded at the global individual food consumption data tool and have representativeness at national level. The source of national level data are the supply utilization accounts, which are compiled by FAO. You might know this data because they are used to create the FAO food balance sheets. In the case of household level data, we use household consumption and expenditure surveys from different sources. For instance, one source of data was the regional program conducted by the WMO countries to standardize the household living conditions surveys. Other sources of data are the national statistical offices that make data available for download in their websites. We have also used data available at the World Bank website and data received from countries under specific agreements. Household consumption and expenditure surveys are conducted in low and middle income countries every 2 to 10 years. By 2018, there were more than 800 surveys for about 140 countries. They are usually representative of the whole population and different geographic areas. They collect information on food quantities and monetary values, as well as socioeconomic characteristics. In the coming slides, I will focus on the work we have been doing with these surveys to produce the statistics for the food and diet domain. We have processed household surveys from 27 countries around the world that were conducted between 2012 and 2021. This slide and the next one present main characteristics of the food module in the 27 surveys. The most used approach to collect information on food was consumption rather than acquisition, and the preferred reference period was 7 days. In case of the data collection method, the record method was preferred over a diary. It's interesting to note that 41% of the surveys did not collect monetary values for foods consumed at home, and 56% of the surveys did not collect quantities for foods consumed away from home. Finally, the total number of foods is different across surveys. There are surveys with less than 126 foods and surveys with more than 400 foods. To process all the surveys, we have standardized methodologies, data files and variable names, the survey's metadata, and the format of the nutrient conversion tables. What is a nutrient conversion table? To convert quantities reported in the survey into nutrients, we need to match the foods in the survey with foods in food composition tables and databases. Each survey has its own food list, so each survey requires specific nutrient conversion table. This means that we have created 87 nutrient conversion tables. To create each nutrient conversion table, we harmonized the food matching process. First, we selected a set of food composition tables and databases around the world based on their quality. We did this applying the FAO inputs evaluation framework. Then we performed the matching based on the FAO inputs food matching guidelines. Given that for most foods consumed at home, there is no information on the cooking method, we consider the nutrient content in the raw form of the food. Similarly, it is rare to find 45 foods in the list, so by default, we consider the nutrient content in unfortified foods. We defined the list of nutrients based on their health relevance and on how frequently they are included in food composition tables and databases. For most nutrients, we use the FAO inputs tag names to identify them in the food composition tables. While in the case of energy, vitamin A, and carbohydrates, we computed their values based on recommended equations. Finally, we have also standardized the classification of foods in groups based on a common nutrition-sensitive food classification. This is how the household level component looks like in the food and diet domain. We can select the country and the year of the survey. We can select one or more food groups. We can define the nutrients of interest, and we can download statistics for different population groups. We can select only one country and year and perform an analysis within a country, but we can also download the statistics for several countries and perform other types of analysis. In the coming slides, I will show you some examples of the types of analysis that could be done with the statistics downloaded from the domain. This table shows protein consumption by food group for each country. And we observe that cereals were within the top 2 main sources of protein in 96% of the countries. And that in one country, milk-based products were a relevant source of protein. In this case, when we analyze protein in terms of animal versus non-animal sources, we observe that protein from animal sources was higher than from non-animal sources in 26% of the countries. This chart presents the proportion of vitamin A from vegetables in total vitamin A consumption, assuming no vitamin A fortification. Considering only the countries where all the foods were matched with unfortified foods, vegetables were the main source of vitamin A in 11 out of 12 countries. And vitamin A from vegetables range between 31 and 67% of total vitamin A. When we analyze urban and rural areas, we have information only for 25 countries, because 2 countries didn't have representativeness at that level. Focusing on dietary energy consumption, we note that in 11 out of 25 countries, rural areas consume more dietary energy than urban areas. Continuing with the area of residence, rural areas consume more iron than urban areas in 17 out of 25 countries. We computed statistics by income group only when the microdata included aggregates of income or consumption expenditure computed by the data owners. This is why the table shows only 22 countries. The first column shows the percentage of meat consumption in total consumption. And the second column shows the result of dividing the meat consumed by the richer people over the meat consumed by the poorer people. We can see that in countries with high level of meat consumption, the richer people consume up to 3.7 times more than the poorer people, while in countries with low level of meat consumption, the richer consume up to 35 times more than the poorer. Finally, in this chart, each bar corresponds to a country, and what is represented is the ratio between the dietary energy consumed by the richer people over the dietary energy consumed by the poorer people. Based on these countries, richer people consume between 1.3 and 2.8 times more dietary energy than the poorer people. Thank you for your interest.
That was a great presentation there from Anna, and we're very appreciative, of course, that she pre-recorded that for us, as she had to send her apologies for today. So now I'd like to welcome the final speakers of the day who are in the room with me. So this is hopefully going to go smoothly, as well, as we've tried every modality of presentation in this short side event. So yeah, I'd like to welcome now, you're going to hear now from Liberty Malambo and Lucia Segovia de la Rivera. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Louise. It's always difficult speaking after your boss have spoken. So my name is Liberty. I'm a research assistant / spatial data scientist with the University of Nottingham. I work in a project called MAPS project, which we have introduced earlier, but for the benefit of those who were not available, I'll just run it through. So MAPS is very big. Some of the people are in this room, you can see on the picture on the side, but for this talk, it's just going to be me and Lucia, and then Gareth and Louise will be chairing. So MAPS, there's two things. If you look at it, there's the MAPS as a project where we work on collaborative methods. We are mainly open source. We're developing a tool, but besides developing the tool, we are also making all the methods and the scripts that we use in making that tool open source. So those are the main issues that we'll be speaking about today. But just remember that there's MAPS, the project that Louise leads, a lot of people that I showed you on the previous slide, and then there's MAPS 2 that we already introduced that you can see on this thing is that we gave you. So if you go on www.mapsafrica, then you'll be able to go there. So this is one of those. So if you look at this on both sides, there's the project on one end and there's a tool on the other end. So I will not go through these slides in much detail. So this is what you typically see if you go on that URL that I gave you. This is the landing page of the MAPS tool. You can go on quick maps, and then the rest of the functionality we are still developing. So we'll be taking you through what we are developing now. And this is a typical, since I think my colleague earlier on, to those who are present, says we are focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. So this is what you can do. Select the geography of interest, select the micronutrient that you want to explore, and then you'll be able to get information on that micronutrient. This is an example of Malawi. So I'm not going into detail, you can explore it. And my colleague, Lucia, who is a very capable nutritionist, take you through this.
Yeah. Thank you, Liberty. Just for the interest of time, I'm going to be very fast on this because, Ellen and Anna already cover. Most of you who are here already know what these household consumption survey expenditure surveys and what you can do with them. Just a small reminder, for nutrition purposes, you can do almost nothing without the food composition data. So those things are always linked together, and we develop resources not only for household survey data set, but also for food composition data set that are also publicly available. So that means there are a number of food composition tables that are clean and ready to be matched with household survey semi-automatically, and you can get very nice output like this one on Malawi for food fortification, done by one of our collaborators, colleagues, Kevin Tang. You have their paper there, a beautiful webinar about this if you're interested in the topic, and you probably can find it around here this week. If you're interested about that, over to Liberty, he's gonna explain all the resources we have.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Lucia. So just to take you back a bit to Ellen's presentation and to Anna's presentation, they both spoke about household consumption and expenditure surveys. And I think there was one running theme there. There are problems with inconsistencies in the results of that data, because you access the data from the World Bank portal differently. Everyone applies their own methods to it, and then the results will be different, but it's the same data. So that's the problem that most people are trying to solve. And Ellen's approach was to come up with guidelines for people who are processing data. So that's the same thing that we were trying to attack as well in MAPS, to say, we've been processing this data a lot. Like our colleague Kevin here processed a lot of data, Garrett processed a lot of data, Lucia processed a lot of data. I also did some processing of the data. And we figured that in every processing that we were doing, there are certain things that we were repeating. So we were trying to find out what are the common steps then that we were all processing. So this diagram shows all the common steps that we were doing. There are about 11 of them here, and then 9 of them are mainly cleaning data. So once the data is cleaned, and then anyone can do any modeling that they require. So then we said, okay, why don't we focus on those 9 steps and try and make consistent tools for processing those 9 steps on any HCS data that you can think of. So when we were trying to do that, we first started off and said, okay, let's write up R functions, because most of us worked in R. Try to write up R functions. And then we figured, oh, well, these functions are now a lot. Why don't we make them into a package? So for example, so there's various packages that we have that we're developing to try and make them open access and make all our methods open source, so that anyone who's processing HCS can pick up our scripts, pick up the package and say, okay, this is what they did, and improve on that. So an example of the packages is HCSR, which has got functions for processing HCS data from the cleaning stage up until it's ready to be modeled. So still in development, you can test it out by installing it through that link and then trying it out. And like I said, we are open sourcing, so you can pull up issues on GitHub and then ask for contributions or ask for anything that you'd like to see in the package. So for example, I'm just waiting for it to go to the next screen, because I'm on the next screen, but
There's lag.
Yeah, there's lag. Okay, yeah, there. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, for example, in this package, one of the things that we are doing in there is we have figured out, I think you got it also from Ellen's presentation, that there is what we call non-standard food lists, because when you collect HCS, the questionnaire that she showed you, there is a standard food list that is there. But enumerators who collect, maybe because they have not seen it on the standard list, or because the person consumed something which is not on the standard list, and then they say, I consumed something called soya, which wasn't on the standard list. And then so what the bulk of the work of cleaning HCS data is trying to match what soya is and that was captured by the enumerator, and what it could be on the standard list. Is it present on the standard list? If it's not, and then try and make sure what's the best food that represents it. So in the package, as you can see on the right-hand side here, these are some of the files that we include in the package. One of them is called a non-standard food list. So on top of it, it shows what the country that survey is from, and then the survey name, IHS5, which is the Integrated Household Survey, 5th edition for Malawi. So there was a food, this enumerator recorded that there was a food called antelope, which was not present on the standard list. So what then we do is show our methods and show what we matched that antelope to. So we matched it to a god. Of course, it's subjective. And so the idea of open sourcing it now is that you can come in and say, okay, you can't say an antelope is a god. You find also on the list what you think matches better, and then you can just pass that comment to us, so that everyone processing these data sets will be using these same names and the same standards. So that's where we are trying to get to. Right, so this is one of the data sets in the package. So our idea is to have this dictionary so that, open source it, develop it together with the community, because one thing I forgot to mention, I'm not a nutritionist. I work in ones and zeros. So that's why Lucia is always there to help me out. So the idea now is to say her decisions in saying, okay, an antelope is a god. Do all other nutritionists agree, or what do you think it is? And then we can work together and develop one framework which is very robust. So this is an example to those who are interested in how we are doing it. This is an example of one of the functions in R. So what this function does is, like I said earlier, there's a lot of things labeled as other. So what it does, it goes in, you tell it, okay, look for other, and then replace it with the things that have been identified as that food item. Okay, and I think this was also a consistent theme in Ellen and Anna's presentations, that one key thing that makes people not be able to replicate each other's methods is documentation. So with our package and with all our methods, it's a running theme in MAPS, which my boss is very proud of, that everything that you develop, you have to have robust documentation for it. So we open source our documentation as well. For this, we'll send a link for it in the chat. So the idea that we have here is that we made documentation for every level, whether you are a beginner, you want to start off and how do I use R, or you're very good in R, you just want to see how do I process my HCS in R. So you can search whatever topic you're looking for. It's not finished yet, it's still in development, and we are also open sourcing it. That means we also accept any contributions to this documentation. So that's the end of our presentation. And I think the next slide, which is still lagging behind, has our contacts in case you want to get in contact with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Liberty and Lucia. I want to thank all of our speakers, really ever so much. We are all in contact with each other through our different projects, and I think that's a very important thing to say, is that working in this space that we're working, we do not want to duplicate and replicate each other's efforts. So we're talking with Ellen about what we're seeing in the data and the cleaning we're having to do. And, you know, hopefully that is nothing but useful to Ellen. We're thrilled about the initiative with Statistics Norway and the other statistics offices. We're working a lot with Anna, and we've been talking again with Anna a great deal. And you could see there the fantastic representations of the data that she showed there and how easy that is to interact with. But also, I think she really did a great job of amplifying some of the structural differences in the different surveys and how important it is as a user of these survey data to understand those quite structural differences in the data. And then what we've seen from Lucia and Liberty is hopefully something that might be exciting and of interest to those of you trying to work with existing HCS data and maybe wanting to use R, maybe wanting to work with reproducible and open source methods. So to anybody in the room and to anybody online who is interested in those methods, please do, again, get in touch. We are super keen to hear from people if they want to reproduce, reuse any of the methods we're using, but we also really, all of us, welcome feedback and comment. Yeah, sorry, so I've just got an announcement to be broadcast by Lucia here in the room.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to say that Liberty is very modest, but he has developed a lot of guidelines and resources to analyze household survey data for Tanzania, for learning R, and a lot of things. So please, if you are interested, just contact him because he has a lot of things.
Thank you to all our speakers. Again, we really appreciate it. This learning hub is going to continue, so do get in touch with us if there's any other aspect of it you're interested, or if there's something maybe you'd like to see us talk about next year at ANH Academy. That would be wonderful. So farewell to everybody online, and thank you ever so much. Goodbye.